Now looking back at me, Religion's is so nice. No, that's like West Kansas City. So fun. Oh, it's been a couple of times. It's the only way, but actually have shootings there. I'm not really thinking about any of them.
Oh, there is. Oh. Hi. That's better. Okay. I do not have a projecting voice, so sorry if you guys didn't hear me. Thank you so much for coming to support our BYU Studies Faith and Cookies. We have these once a month, and it's usually an author that has published with us, and we have them talk about their article or whatever else they are researching, and they present it to you, and then we usually have a Q&A at the end so you can ask questions, and we try to make it on topics that are relevant to y'all. So yeah, our next one is October 23rd, and it will actually be in the Varsity Theater. In fact, I think the rest of the year, every month is in the Varsity Theater. We just couldn't get it this time, so we're in here this time. But next month is Barbara Morgan Gardner. She'll be talking about the Family Proclamation and how that evolved and came about. So a lot of accurate information there that she'll be providing. She's interviewed everyone that was involved, and it'll be really good. But today we have Justin Dyer. Justin Dyer is our new editor-in-chief over BYU Studies, which is super awesome. He was also a fellow at the Wheatley Institute, and obviously a professor of religion here at BYU. We're super thrilled to have him. His research focuses on the connection between mental health and religion, and hopefully how they help each other, right? Or how one helps the other. So and he's been published in all over the world and in court cases and all kinds of things. So his research is very much sought after, and he'll be actually doing more of that at BYU Studies. So we're really excited for that. So I've kind of forgot to ask someone to say a prayer. Would anyone like to volunteer? Julia, I kind of looked at you. Okay, thank you. Awesome.
Dear Heavenly Father, we're grateful for this day. We're grateful we can gather together on this university campus and listen to Dr. Dyer. Please bless him with thy spirit as he speaks to us, and that we will also have thy spirit with us so that we can learn the messages that thou hast prepared for us. Please bless us to remember what we learn, and please bless us in our studies and all our other righteous endeavors. And we say these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Awesome. Okay, Justin. You're good. Yeah, sorry. I'm not sure.
Well, I'm super glad to be presenting on this today. This kind of combines two of my great loves. So I teach religion, but then you also notice some statistics in here. So I also taught graduate statistics. And of course, I typically say that my stats students pray a lot more in class than do my religion students. And my children, two of whom are here today, know that I will often be working away in the office, and I'll be like, okay, I got to show you this graph. I got to show you this cool graph that I made. So much so that one of my daughters made for me this little thing. It's a graphic novel, right? You got it, love it. So what do we want to do today? And I'm hopefully going to get done in plenty of time for you to have, ask any questions that you might have. But first, we want to talk about religion in general, popular narratives about religion and well-being. And then we're going to get into the research. So what does the research actually say on that? And then we're going to get into the well-being of students at religious and non-religious universities. You may not know, but there are actually almost 1,000 religious universities in the United States. And many of those also have the same kinds of, say, honor codes that we do around honesty, around chastity, and those kinds of things. And so we've been able to do some research on that. We're going to share that with you a bit today. So popular narratives about religion sometimes are not terribly positive towards religion. You have Sigmund Freud in The Future of Illusion saying that religion is comparable to a childhood neurosis. You have Richard Dawkins and The God Delusion, and Christopher Hitchens saying God is not great, how religion poisons everything. That's a little bit of a dismal view, but was an editor choice for Amazon, #1 bestseller in the United States. So we have kind of these popular narratives about religion that maybe it's actually not so good for us. And we can understand that, right? As a religious person, you might feel like it would be kind of easier if I just kind of pitched the whole religion thing, out the window. That'd be kind of nice. That would feel a lot better than having the kinds of expectations I do within religion. And now, to be fair, there are some things about religion that can go wrong. C.S. Lewis said this: if the divine call does not make us better, it will make us very much worse. Of all bad men, religious bad men are the worst. Of all bad teachers, are religion bad teachers? I don't want to. I'm going to ask that question. Religion is a structure, and as with any structure, that structure can be used for good or for ill. And we have those kind of structures all over the place, and they're fantastic structures, like a mother-child, right? That's a structure, and that can be used for extraordinary good, but there can also be some bad things that happen within that structure. And so the key is, okay, how do we use that structure in ways that bless and benefit? And I'm just going to summarize, if you will, a bunch of thoughts and ideas and research there. Religion becomes harmful when you take out its heart, which are the two great commandments, the love of God and the love of neighbor. If you take those two things out, that's when religion starts to become bad, because then it's hollow. Now, the good thing is that religions often teach this. Lots of religions teach this, and therefore we derive a lot of benefit from that. Now, okay, the question comes, well, wouldn't we be better off if we could just pitch the whole thing out? Well, let's go to research on religion and human flourishing. And just on average here, and we've been doing research on religion and well-being for a long time. On average, and right, we understand that, on average, religious people have greater life happiness, greater marital happiness and stability, more fulfilling marital sexual relations, less domestic violence, stronger parent-child relationships, better physical health, better mental health, less abuse of alcohol and drugs, higher rates of charitable giving and volunteering, fewer sexually transmitted diseases. I mean, all across the spectrum. I've literally done analyses on millions of people, dozens of data sets, and whenever I'm looking at some kind of like well-being or life outcome, flourishing, you put some religious variable in there, like, are they affiliated with religion? Do they pray? Do they read their scriptures? Nearly universally, you put those in there, and religious people on average are doing better. Now, the context of our day-to-day is one where people are, on average, struggling to flourish more. This is a graph on deaths of despair, and this includes deaths due to alcohol and drugs, suicide, those kinds of things. We refer to them as deaths of despair. And you can see since the year 2000, we've kind of gone off the rails a bit. Sometimes we're asked, well, we hear that mental health problems today are worse than in the past. Is that really true? Are we just diagnosing better? And yes, we are diagnosing better. There's a lot of wonderful things going on with that. But the reality also is that we're struggling mightily in many ways in our particularly Western societies with mental health, with these deaths of despair. Now, here again, these feed my soul, these graphs. We have here in blue the US suicide rate since 1948, and the percentage of individuals that have a religion since 1948, those are in red. And I've centered it. You don't know what this all means, that's okay. Standardized it on 1948. So this is the distance from the 1948 level. And you don't have to have taken any one of my stats classes to see something going on in, again, the year 2000, where those diverge. And if, say, Freud and others were right, that religion is just a hindrance to us, and if Christopher Hitchens was right, that just poisons everything, you would expect, if you will, that as religion decreases, well-being would increase. But we actually see the exact opposite. With the decline of religion, we're seeing this increase in mental health difficulties. Now, correlation, as you know, does not mean causation, but we've been doing research on religion and suicide for literally over 100 years. Emil Durkheim, the father of sociology, back in the 1890s, did a study looking at, well, how does religion impact rates of suicide? And he's doing this across Europe. Now, since then, 2016 Handbook Suicide Prevention says that research tends to support the basic premise that religion provides protection against suicide risk. Tyler Vanderwill at Harvard said that nearly 40% of that increase in the suicide rate could be attributed to the decline in religious service attendance. Now, please don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying that no religious person is going to have suicidal thoughts. Of course, we know that. We know that even religious individuals may have suicidal thoughts, may die by suicide. But on average, what we see is that individuals who are religious are less prone to that. Now, why is that? Why is religion seen as protective? Well, number one, social networks. You go to church and people are asking about you. You go and you're not at church and people are asking about you, right? You have people around there who are connected with you. Sometimes it says that the opposite of suicide ideation is connection, that we feel connected with other individuals. Stronger family connections. Religions often emphasize family. Hello, you're probably part of one of them, right? Emphasize those relationships and building those relationships. Religious integration, in addition to the social networks, just you're around more people, the sense of belonging. It provides meaning in suffering. Suffering without meaning is doubly difficult. Religion often teaches that suicide's against God's will. Your life is in God's hands, and He wants you to live. And then religions often teach healthy life patterns. So there's any number of reasons why religion is related to more positive mental health. But then I suspect that all of you might be noticing that something's missing from there. These are the sociologic reasons. These are the reasons that any sociologist, atheist, religious would say, yeah, these are the reasons why religion would be related to better mental health. They're very good sociologic reasons. But you probably sense that, oh, those moments when I'm actually connected with a higher power than myself. And that you actually get some support and meaning from the divine, which is real. Like, that is not usually in the sociological literature, but certainly for our own experiences, that's what we feel. Now, what about college students? We've had this increase in mental health difficulties in general. And yes, U.S. college students have experienced the same thing. Between the fall of 2009 and 2015, the number of students seeking counseling on campuses increased by 30 to 40%. That's a massive increase. In just that amount of time, we've had that increase, almost 50% increase, and that's primarily they're seeking help for suicidal thoughts. In 2016, for the first time, the majority of incoming freshmen, this is nationwide, rated their mental health as below average. So college students today are struggling more with their mental health than in the past. Now, something that me and a colleague of mine, Janet Erickson, did is we got a hold of some data, not collected by us, but national data on 135,000 college students across the United States, 140 universities across the US. And what we wanted to know is, okay, how does the mental health of those at religious universities compare with the mental health of those at non-religious universities? Now, this grew out of a court case where people were suing the U.S. Department of Education for providing money, Pell Grants to the students, other grants to faculty. They were suing the U.S. Department of Education for providing those monies because some of the universities had, say, the kinds of codes that we have here at BYU, an honor code. Or in particular, they have codes about chastity. And so they were suing the U.S. Department of Education for giving monies there. And so what we wanted to know is, well, okay, how do people do at religious universities versus not religious universities? Because the argument was, and maybe you could sense what the argument might be, people at those universities, students at those universities are probably doing worse because they're being confined by that darn honor code. And there's actually hundreds of universities, over 200 universities, that have those kinds of honor codes like BYU has. And so the question was, well, are people really struggling more? And including sexual and gender minorities or LGBTQ individuals. Is being at a religious university like that bad for them? Now, the lawsuit couldn't cite any research about it because there was no research about it. And so we decided, okay, well, we ought to do that research. And so we got the data and conducted that. So just baseline results of that by university type. We could really, by the way, BYU was not in this research. So BYU was not one of the 140 universities that we surveyed, that were surveyed. We didn't do the survey, it was collected by others. So you had evangelical, Catholic, and then we kind of pulled together all other religious universities and then the non-religious universities. Now, evangelical are going to be, say, a little bit more like, in terms of their patterns, like BYU. They're a little more on the, or a lot more on the socially conservative end of things. So we don't have Latter-day Saint University in here, but what we found is that for students at evangelical schools, 8.2% of them had seriously considered suicide in the last year. Now, we can all agree that's too high, right? I mean, that's way too high. Unfortunately, that's kind of the waters we're swimming in right now. At the same time, you look at the other ones, Catholics a little bit higher, other religions a little bit higher, and the highest are those students at non-religious universities. What about importance of religion? How important is religion to these college students? For those who felt religion was very important, 8.6% of them had seriously considered suicide. Again, that's not a good number, right? If the numbers aren't zero, we have a lot of work to do still. At the same time, as you go up in, or I said down in importance, for it being very unimportant, 18.3, nearly 1 in 5. Nearly 1 in 5 students who felt religion was very unimportant and seriously considered suicide, double the rate of those that considered it very important. Again, we're seeing this protective factor. Now, findings with the wonderful statistical controls that you would want to see were somewhat interesting. We found that students with no religious affiliation did better at evangelical universities than a non-religious university. And students who felt religion was very unimportant did better at a Catholic university than a non-religious university. So initially, we kind of thought, well, it's going to be about fit, right? Non-religious students going to fit better at a non-religious school. Religious students going to fit better at a religious school. But what's interesting, we seem to find, is that a religious student carries that religious protection with them wherever they go. But a non-religious student, when they come to a religious university, has the patterns of the religion there, and they're still, signing on the dotted line. Yep, a non-religious student comes to BYU, they still have to sign the honor code, and they're going to derive the benefits of that religious university. Well, what about LGBTQ plus students? What did we find there? We wrote an article in Christianity Today off of these findings that were based on the academic article that try to help describe this. So what we found is that LGBTQ plus students did significantly better at other religious universities compared to non-religious universities. So again, it seemed like being at the religious university, even for LGBTQ plus individuals, was on average better. Again, please don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying that LGBTQ plus individuals can't struggle and don't struggle at religious universities, or non-LGBTQ plus students, right? There are struggles there. I'm not trying to paint over any of that. But again, just to say that on average, that's what we're seeing. Now, this was an interesting finding. At evangelical universities, it depended on how religious the LGBTQ plus individual was. On average, if they were religious, they did the very best at the evangelical schools. In fact, the rates of suicide ideation were the very lowest of all LGBTQ plus students across the nation. Those who are religious and at an evangelical school did the very best. And again, the evangelical schools are some of the most conservative ones. But if they were non-religious, then they did very poorly. So it did seem perhaps that there was a matter of fit in this instance. where LGBTQ plus at an evangelical school, very religious, if the student was very religious, they did fantastic there, on average again, right? But if they were not religious, then it seemed like there were some difficulties, additional difficulties there. I just want to bring this, this research up. This was done on, in Illinois, which is a wonderful place. That's where I got my graduate degree. Not Southern Illinois, but they looked at how African-American students did at a university, depending on whether that student was religious or non-religious. And they say this: for most of the participants in this study, maintaining their church involvement while in college proved to be a positive decision. To varying degrees, these students attributed their successful transitions into college, academic performance, career selection, ability to cope with stress, and desire to accept and improve the lives of others. They attribute that to their church involvement, religious practice, and spirituality. Essentially, church provides African-American college students with another family and a sense of home that they need to survive and succeed both in college and in life. Again and again, we find that when people are at a university connected with religion, on average, they're going to do better. Now, I want to go to zoom in a little bit more to the daily stresses that university students can experience. So look at religion and the pressures of college / just life, the pressures of those. This comes from an individual who was in therapy for what's called scrupulosity, and that overlaps a lot with what we refer to as toxic perfectionism. I'll get into that in just a second. So this student says, I became obsessed with academic perfection, so obsessed that I believed anything less than 100% was a personal and moral failure. When I missed even a single point on an assignment, my entire day was ruined. My negative thoughts, I think it's an interesting phrase, would bully me. Have you ever had negative thoughts bully you? For example, how could I have been so lazy and not studied harder? So this lands in what we refer to as toxic perfectionism. Now, what is that? How does it interface with religion? Because you would expect, my goodness, religious people should be super perfectionistic in a toxic way because we have those phrases like be ye therefore perfect. And we have these high standards. But, and I'm going to, this was published in BYU Studies on Understanding Perfectionism by Kavika Allen, Deborah McClendon, some students. When we're talking about toxic perfectionism, we're not talking about high expectations. Those are good. Having high expectations is a really good thing in life, guiding you to good places. Toxic perfectionism is also not about us failing to meet those high expectations, because all of us will fail to meet our expectations. I slept later today than I wanted to, right? I mean, we all have expectations that every day we're going to not meet. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about toxic perfectionism. When we're talking about that, we're talking about how we feel about ourselves when we don't meet those expectations. And that we tie our success to our sense of being valued and lovable. If I'm successful, I'm valued. If I'm successful, I'm lovable. But then failure means that I have no value and I'm unlovable. So toxic perfectionism is about how we feel about ourselves when we don't meet those expectations. So if we go by religion, and this was actually done with, this was also done through BYU Studies, this research published there. For the religiously affiliated, 12% of them were high on toxic perfectionism. Right? Again, that's too high a number. It's not that religious people altogether can avoid these kinds of things. At the same time, atheist agnostics who are never religious were at 20% toxic perfectionism. The not religiously affiliated, but those that believed in God were at 13%. Now, why is that? But they don't have these high expectations, right? They don't have these kind of expectations that people who are religious have. How is it that they can be high in toxic perfectionism? Well, if you've ever been online and in social media or watched a Marvel movie, Are there expectations there for how we should look, how we should be? The point here is that equating our worth with our success seems to be a natural human tendency. It's natural and it's human, part of the natural man. Sometimes the natural man isn't just like evil. Sometimes the natural man is just scared. And is going to do things to try to fit in. But that's a natural tendency to equate our success with our worth. And it manifests itself in various contexts, aspects of our lives, be it academic, be it religious. So somebody who, say, is really struggling with toxic perfectionism, that may simply manifest itself within the religious context. Now, there are some times when religions and individuals within religions might teach in a way that would indicate your success is tied to your value, but typically within religions, we get something very different. Those who can connect their individual worth to something permanent and lasting, less likely to experience it. My daughter created this little thing. I am a child of God, child of the covenant, and a disciple of Christ. Right? Trying to tie our worth to something greater than just our success. Now, let's look at another graph again real quick and see how this seems to have functioned. This is a graph of self-derogation. In other words, I hate myself. I don't think I'm any good. And this is high school seniors in the United States across time. So high school seniors in 1979, high school seniors in 91, high school seniors in 2021. And you can see here the non-religious in solid and the religious in dashed lines. And you can see the non-religious are a little bit higher in self-derogation. The higher is worse, right? So they're a little bit higher in self-derogation over time. But then you hit 2011, something of a crisis point in our society. And the not religious, everybody seemed to increase a bit, bump up a bit, but the not religious were particularly vulnerable to this moment in our history. Now, what happens in 2011? Yeah, social media happens in 2011. And it's not like the religious or non-religious get to escape this, right? It's simply present and expectation rise, but the religious often have a sense of transcendent value that's not based on what we do. And I'm going to refer to this as if value versus infinite value. The if value is more, if you will, the worldly way of value. The infinite value is more godly way. If value simply means if you are only valuable and lovable if you got the newest phone, you get that A, you get into the program you wanted to, you're the Relief Society president or the Elders Quorum president, you were asked on a date, your post was liked, you do better than your roommate on an exam. You ask your roommate how they did on that exam, and they said, I got a 90. And you're like, I hate you, right? Because you got an 89. If they'd got an 88, then I would have been so happy with my life. But they beat you out. You have a boyfriend, girlfriend, you're married, you look like a Marvel sorry to bring up Marvel here, but there's something with that, right? Right? You're only valuable if you have those things. Now, let's contrast that with infinite value. And I actually want to start with a Catholic declaration. This comes from the Dignitas Infinita on human dignity, or infinite dignity. And it says this, I think this is an interesting thought. The first conviction drawn from Revelation holds that the dignity of the human person comes from the love of the Creator, who has imprinted the indelible features of his image on every person. You're of infinite worth because the infinite values you. You are of infinite value because the infinite values you, right? I value, for example, this tie. And you're like, that's not a very special tie. But it was my grandpa's tie, right? This was my grandpa's tie. So I value this tie, something that means a lot to me, right? Wouldn't have much meaning to other individuals. But if you wanted to understand me and why I like this tie, you'd have to understand me. If we want to participate in the divine nature, we also have to value things the way the divine values things. If we want to participate in God's nature, we have to value other individuals infinitely, because that's how the divine values them. We have to see the divine in others because that's how the divine sees them. And we have to also see it within ourselves. To participate in the divine nature, we must also value ourselves as the divine values us. It's not a pride thing. It's a thing about understanding the divine. Accordingly, dignity is also inherent. It's just there. You can't get away from it. It's inherent in each person's body, which participates in its own way in being imago Dei, the image of God, and is also called to share in the soul's glory, in the divine blessedness, in the divine beatitude. So that's a Catholic declaration on that. We just go to the BYU Statement on Belonging. We are united in our common primary identity as children of God. At other universities, what is it united as? United as learners, as scholars, as students, right? We're united in those things, which are wonderful things to be united as. In graduate school in Illinois, I was united with the others as graduate students. It's a fantastic thing. But at a religious university in particular, and if you're BYU, we're united because of this divine identity. We value and embrace the variety of individual characteristics, life experiences, circumstances, perspectives, talents, and gifts of each member of the community, and the richness and strength they bring to our community. Sister Jennifer Kieran, 2018, said this: "You know this, but those of you who struggle with it need to hear it often and be reassured of your infinite worth, which is entirely unconnected to your attainments, but intrinsically linked to your relationship with God." You have that relationship, and you are a child of God, and that relationship never goes away. Linked to that infinite worth. President Thomas S. Monson said, "My dear sisters," this was at a Relief Society session of conference, "My dear sisters, your Heavenly Father loves you, each of you. That love never changes. It is not influenced by your appearance, by your possessions, or by the amount of money you have in your bank account. It is not changed by your talents and abilities. It is simply there. It is there for you when you are sad or happy, discouraged or hopeful. God's love is there for you whether or not you feel you deserve it. It is simply always there." When we have these kinds of messages, it helps us to avoid the kinds of toxic perfectionism that so easily we can slide into, because we recognize, you know what? I did really poorly on that exam, but I'm still of infinite worth. And that can't be changed. And I'm still going to be okay. And the Savior is still with me. Well, let me just end here with this idea from President and Sister Reese this last Tuesday, where they asked us to become givers of light, that we should be giving this gift to other individuals. And being at a religious university provides us with the language and the structure to be able to do this so well. I teach Unit 101, and I mentioned this morning. I got some of my students here. It's so good to see you. But teaching at another university, when I started to get onto, or a subject of religion or spirituality or spiritual life began to emerge, what do you have to do? You got to close that down. Sorry. That's not appropriate, right? To bring in one's spiritual life, religious beliefs. And so me being a pretty religious individual, right? When you start into those kinds of conversations within a class, like, I got to be quiet. Got to censor myself because I can't speak with my whole person because of that context. At a religious university, it is a blessed thing that we get to speak with our whole selves and address the whole person. Again, one of the reasons why we're having so many problems today is we're disconnecting individuals from their divine nature. We're disconnecting them from the religious community, the religious body. But here at this kind of location, we can have that. Are we perfect? Absolutely not. Right? Do we have things that we need to do to be better? Absolutely. And we should recognize those things. As part of the Lord's church, we have an obligation to recognize when things aren't going very well and do our very best to improve those situations. At the same time, we can recognize the real blessing it is to be at a religious university. And I say that in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
All right, we have a little more time. If anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to take questions or thoughts that you had as we went over this. Anything that anybody would like to ask? Please.
Is there any research data looking at toxic perfectionism among non-religious students, whatever, but with strong families?
Oh, I don't know of any of that. In fact, I don't know of a lot of toxic perfectionism. So no research specifically on that. But here's what I would just say: a non-religious person with a family that is very supportive is easily, on average, going to have lower toxic perfectionism. Sometimes as parents, we can indicate to our children that because they didn't do the dishes right, they're kind of worthless. Whatever, right? Or whatever it is, right? We can indicate to our kids that their worth as a child to us is dependent on their performance. And we want to make sure as parents that we're looking at that. Now, sometimes, again, it's a natural human tendency. Sometimes our kids will just pick that up, even if we're being the very best parents in the world, right? And we might have to explain and work with them. But yes, toxic perfectionism, kind of the underlying question there, can be greatly influenced by our family relationships, how we're raised. Yeah. Uh-huh.
So for the honor code, as well as the law of chastity, and talking about like same sex.
Uh-huh.
So like a straight couple can. I was just wondering, does it have it in like other like a
Yeah. So the honor code here at BYU says that sexual relationships are only to be between a man and a woman who are married. There are many other universities, and again, in about 200 universities that also have that same pattern within their honor code. So BYU is actually not unique on that. And that's why the government was being sued, is because there were all these universities that had that, and they were saying that, being at that kind of university isn't good for those individuals. So that was the whole thing. It wasn't, BYU, we're unique in a lot of ways, but sometimes we think that, we're the only place that has that kind of a pattern, when in fact hundreds of other universities actually have that exact same pattern. Great question. You got a question? Yeah.
Yeah, so causation doesn't equal causation. With the try to like religion and often because of beliefs of value, not just like how we treat our body, but like the ideas that we believe in, that there's a higher, that we have a purpose here. Does that plays a big role?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that sense of purpose, that higher thing is protective against suicide risk. Again, it's not 100%, right? And we always recognize this is on average. But yes, those specific beliefs can be very, very helpful. The two beginning points, if you will, in the research on suicide, the two beginning points are, if you will, in one theory that's used widely, that a person has perceived burdensomeness, that they perceive that they're a burden to others. But if they have a sense that, I'm not a burden to others, I do have infinite value, infinite worth, that can short circuit feelings of perceived burdensomeness. Yes?
It's a really interesting presentation, Justin. I'm curious, when you start thinking about your experience at the University of Illinois and other state schools and stuff, where we have strong institute programs or intervarsity or interfaith things, is there research that looks at the role that those sorts of faith communities in non-religious institutions play or don't play in suicide ideation or other aspects of the law?
Yeah, there's a little bit of that. In fact, in our study, the one that I showed earlier, we also looked at within those data, we had religious extracurricular activities. So are you doing something that's religious that's outside of, your normal, your classes and everything? And there was a host of different extracurricular activities they could choose from. And the ones who selected, yep, I do these religious extracurricular activities, they did better. So I would then, assume that, well, if Institute would be one of those extracurricular activities, then I would just fit that within that bucket. So from what I know, from what the data I've seen, yes, that would be incredibly helpful.
You mentioned this whole research came because of a court case, a specific court case. Was the research done in time to give to that court case? What was the decision?
It was, yeah. The court cases last a long time. And so as it began, really, there was just no research on it. And somebody asked me, hey, have you done any of that? And I said, no, but I do research on religion and mental health. And let me look for a data set that we'd be able to get at this question from. So I looked around and found a really good data set on college students. And I used that. And I don't know, usually from beginning to end, from when you begin a research project to when it's finally published, it can last a long time. This was probably about 7 or 8 months, but it was still in process, and it was used in what are called amicus briefs for the Ninth Circuit Court, which is where it was at. So I don't know if one of the things is the very easy answer to that court case is, well, if you strip their funding, then these universities are going to close, and then you're not going to give people the option to attend a university like that, right? You're going to remove the freedom of people to be able to attend a university. You all chose to attend a university that had an honor code. And presumably, those that do that, they think, that's actually going to be a benefit. And so if the funding were stripped from these universities, then it would not allow a person to have the option to attend one of those universities. So I'm sure that's what won the day in the end on that. But it was also helpful to have data, because the claim was that people at these universities are struggling more when we find just the exact opposite is true. That is so often the case when we look at religion and mental health, is that our often knee-jerk reaction to that is totally wrong, and it's just the opposite. But again, it makes sense to us because I'm a religious person. It would feel so much easier if I abandoned these standards. And sometimes we take the standards incorrectly. Sometimes we are toxic perfectionists. 12%? That's 12% of people who are here in this room. How many is that? Right? So there still is that's there, but we need to make sure that we differentiate the natural tendency towards toxic perfectionism and the standards of the church, which are incredibly healthy for individuals. You just go through the standards of the church and you're like, holy cow, those are really healthy. You do the research and you go through, it's like, that's the good life. That's the good life. Other questions? Anything else? Please.
Justin, why do you think that knee-jerk reaction narrative is so prevalent that religion is harmful for LGBTQ individuals or just general well-being? Why is that so prevalent today in common media narrative, social media, TikTok? And what can we do? Obviously, with your research, what can we do as everyday people when narratives like that come up?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we moved from a model. It's really the place we're at today and how we think about human beings is very, very different than it was 60 years ago. Very different from where it was 100 years ago, 200 years ago. We think about human beings very differently today than we did in the past. And a lot of it does have to do with some of the things like Sigmund Freud and his thoughts about how human beings are, what makes them tick. So we've moved from a model of our objective is to please God to the objective is to please ourselves. And to find out what our identity is, not through God, but to find out what our identity is through what pleases us. Right? And so that is a radically different way of thinking about a human being. A person who thinks about their identity in terms of what pleases God It's very different from what pleases myself. And religion says that, well, pleasing God is the number one thing. And that is the most important thing. And that there are certain things that would please you that you then shouldn't do. And so you get this real conflict between this idea that, well, within our society, and it's just within the water that we drink, the air that we breathe, that your identity is about whatever pleases you and not what pleases God. And therefore, if anything says, well, you shouldn't do what you feel like doing, that's wrong, that's bad, that's restrictive, all those kinds of things, right? And we get a lot of the language from Freud and others have come along. I don't want to put too much on Freud. He said some great things. But we get a lot of that language that's come along from that. It's just a very different way of thinking about human beings. And so that's why, and I had one slide at one point that just had quotes from my Facebook feed that were like, did you know how bad religion is for these people? Da, 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 da. And just everybody saying that. And a lot of these were very bright individuals, but just assumed that was the case without any research to back it up. And so we have this kind of assumption of how we think about human beings. And then from that flows our assumptions about what's good and bad, and then about religion. And so that's kind of why, that's part of why we're ended up at the place that we're at. And part of the reason why we're seeing the spike in difficulties. And it's really hard to argue against that. That's not just me as a religious person saying that. From a research standpoint, that's just what we see.
Okay, just about like the basic study that was conducted. I don't know if you know this, but I thought I'd ask. Was the questioning like about whether or not an individual had suicide ideation? Was it just like framed as like, have you like had suicide ideation?
Yeah.
Or have you had it during college? Like how specific?
Yeah, that's a great question. It was in the last, the specific question is, in the last 12 months, have you seriously considered suicide, yes or no? So also in the study, we looked at anxiety as well. So we have another measure of anxiety. So part of it, when I said they do better or whatever, sometimes it was they had lower rates of suicide ideation. Other times it was they had lower anxiety. Yeah, great question. Well, thank you all for coming. It was so wonderful to be with you here. Have a wonderful rest of your day and week. Appreciate it.
We shall see. So cute. All I know is I'm gonna take it out of there in like an hour and a half, and it's still gonna be warm. And it's gonna taste better.
Oh, I didn't Yes. Yeah, like that. Like, have I not? She's in my. Yeah. Depends on the article. We had like one author who was doing like a 4-part series about like the history of Turkish administration, and just like would write articles about counties doing issues and what counties said criticizing. Nice to meet you. Yeah.
That's a great question. That's really
I love it.
A joyful.
The more we do it, the more we talk about it, the more
We get there. Thanks.
Good to see you.
Hey, how are you doing? Good. How are you? So good. Good to see you.
No, I mean, it's obviously, of course. Love it. All that. You get mine? Really?
Yeah, and I thought, well, like, you? Hi. How are you? So nice to meet you. Oh, so good to see you. How is it going?
It's time.
I saw on Facebook that you were for the semester. He's kind of floating
Don't
around.
feel like you're behind,
I
right? Because what God cares about is where our heart is. Like me.
Yes.
pretty much
Okay.
where I am.
Yeah. So we
And
the
you're doing a
Spackmans
lot better
in
than I am.
Illinois. They knew
So
it's big. So yeah. So this is Gwen and this is Cecily. So you're both from the okay. And then Brooklyn, Wheeler that you have. Oh yeah, freshman year. That is their niece.
yeah,
Their
if you have any questions.
brother and sister were also in Illinois. Anyway, so you were in nursery with
Jason and Kara's next daughter, Talia's here.
Right, so, okay, so yeah, you guys totally lined up, so yeah, and this is Dallin, our new son-in-law.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah.
We're in your ward.
So, yeah, we don't
They're fantastic partner with Gardner.
Yeah.
So,
So.
yeah, that's, those kinds of things are just helpful to kind of get a sense.
Oh, we're so happy.
Yeah, it's really. So where are you from? Las Vegas? Wonderful.
It's awesome.
Get around to the city rod fair.
Yes, you do need to go.
We're gonna name drop you. We're gonna name drop you as clout. Stephanie Bryan.
Oh,
Yes.
totally.
Definitely be like, oh, you know Iceland.
You know Iceland? She's
No,
amazing.